Are you a dog behavior geek like me? Join me for my absolute favorite weekend of the year, the 2025 Dog Behavior Conference. If you've attended before, you know how special the DBC is. And if you've never joined us for this amazing 3-day online event, it's truly a one-of-a-kind gathering of like-minded dog geeks, pet pros, trainers, and animal advocates from all over the world. Registration is now open at dogbehaviorconference.com, and the virtual live conference takes place on April the 4th to the 6th. So, reserve your spot today at dogbehaviorconference.com. That's dogbehaviorconference.com. I'll see you there. Having a fearful and reactive dog can be very hard. Be very hard on the dog, and be very hard for guardians. And that's why my next guest is an expert on this issue. She has written a book called, and I have it here, Bark, The Science of Helping Your Anxious, Fearful, or Reactive Dog. It came out at the end of last year. I absolutely love it. It is a great read. Zazie Todd, she writes so beautifully. And so it's really easy to understand. And this is her, she's done a lot of books, including Purr as well, a book for understanding your cat. She is speaking at the Dog Behavior Conference, and her topic is Firsts and Nice Surprises, a new look at how to help fearful dogs. Zazie is an animal behavior expert, author, and founder of Companion Animal Psychology, and she regularly writes with Psychology Today. I'm always seeing your articles on Psychology Today. Zazie, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to chat with you.
Well, you're going to be speaking at the Dog Behavior Conference, which, by the way, folks, if you don't know, it is April the 4th to the 7th. It's a 3-day live virtual conference. Zazie will be one of 12 fabulous speakers. And I asked her to speak this year because of this book, to help everybody if they have an anxious, fearful, and or reactive dog. So, Zazie, this book is much needed. I feel like in our industry that because I think of the way that everybody's living, how busy everybody is, and just the dogs are living more in confinement and they're having to go along with our busy lives and slot into it, which can be very difficult for some dogs, that this book is so needed because we're seeing more and more anxiety, dog to dog and dog to human reactivity. And we're seeing a lot more fearful dogs, especially coming into shelters.
Yes, I think that seems to be the case. And before I say any more, I'm absolutely thrilled to be speaking at your conference, and I love the lineup of speakers. I can't wait to hear the other speakers too. So I'm really, really excited about that. And yes, I wrote Bark because I think people really struggle when they have a fearful dog, and I wanted to give them some hope and give them some easy ways to start to deal with it. And of course, it's not easy when you have a fearful dog. We have to be honest about that. And it does seem that there is an increase. There isn't any clear data on that, but anecdotally, a lot of us feel that there is an increase. And then there is some research that shows that as a result of the pandemic and the experiences that dogs had then, there does, in fact, seem to be an increase amongst those dogs that were acquired during the pandemic. They do seem more likely to suffer from fears and anxieties. So I think it does feel like it's real, that there is really an increase in fearful dogs. And life is quite hard for dogs in many ways because we just expect them to fit into our lives. As you just mentioned, we expect them to fit in, to do the things that we want. And I think because having a very fearful dog can mean you have to make quite a few changes, and that's hard for the dog guardian too.
It is really hard for guardians. And then that, of course, that leads to, especially if they're not getting support, then that leads them going, well, I've got no other alternative than to give my dog up to a shelter, which of course is just the very worst thing that can happen to that dog. I mean, there's worse, of course, but then they're in their fearful dog and now they're in a shelter. And that's not good for even the most confident dog, especially if they're there for a long time, which if they're fearful, they're most likely going to be there for a long time and they might not be that successful.
That's right. But one of the nice things about researching this book is I found some research that says that when people get help, they go to an appropriate source for help, it makes a big difference. And, it really helps to keep dogs in homes. It helps people to resolve those behavior issues. So I think it's really important that people know that they can get help. They can reach out to someone. They need to make sure, however, that the person they're reaching out to is properly qualified to work with that kind of problem and is only going to use reward-based methods. So you know as well as I do that unfortunately a lot of people don't, some dog trainers don't, and that can cause a lot more problems. So it's really important that people know there is help, but they have to get the right help and they have to know who to look for. And I always tell people that especially they should look for people who've studied with you, so people who have graduated from the Victoria Stilwell Academy or from the Karen Pryor Academy or from the Academy for Dog Trainers run by Jean Donaldson, which I'm a graduate of. And those 3 programs, I think, are all absolutely wonderful. And if you go to one of those graduates, you know that you're going to get really good quality help with your dog. And of course, there are other places you can go to as well, but those are the 3 that I especially like to recommend to people.
Well, thank you. We're very honored that you recommend VSA. We're very proud of the course that we have developed, and also VSA loves to evolve, so we keep evolving all the time. Now, in your book, that's how I think I really like it, because it's this wonderful mixture of just being so accessible to everybody, but also being really deeply rooted in science. So if you had a question about anything, you just look at the back and then you've just got your resources and your references at the back here. I mean, they're long because this is science, right? This is not just opinion. So if I look, I mean, your references, there are so many pages and pages and pages of notes at the end of each chapter. This is so well researched. I mean, my goodness, I don't think, I mean, in all my books, I also have notes at the end where everything that I have stated in my book, if it comes from a research or from some kind of project that people have been working on, that I cite it. It's really important to cite it. So anyway, that's what I love about this. You have made science really accessible.
Thank you. I tried really hard to do that. And yes, there's pages and pages of references because I've read hundreds of papers in order to write this book. And the reason for that is that there is actually a lot of science that can really help us. And I think especially when we're thinking about classical conditioning, everyone thinks about Pavlov and Pavlov's dogs, and they probably don't realize that this is still an ongoing area of research and that there is still, a lot that people are finding out there. And so I've read lots of papers, and they weren't all about dogs. Some of them were about people, because there's quite a bit of research on people and classical conditioning that's relevant. And some of them were about rats and mice, because psychologists like to use those as a model a lot of the time as well. And then some of it was about dogs, because of course in the last 10, 20 years, we've had this huge amount of research in canine science, which is so relevant to our everyday lives with dogs. So I've looked at all of that, and I've tried really hard to turn it into things that are easy to understand, because I think the science of how to do counter conditioning, it is a bit technical. I think, people do sometimes find it a bit difficult. And I've tried really hard to make that easy to understand what to do. And also I've provided information so that people can troubleshoot, because sometimes people say to me they've tried it and it's not working, and it does work absolutely beautifully. But there are some common mistakes that people make. So I've just provided as much information as I can to help people, to make it accessible to people so that they can find what to do that will help their dog for their particular situation.
So for listeners who don't understand what counter conditioning is, can you explain?
Yes, so it's a really powerful technique that we can use when a dog is afraid of something, and we can use it to teach them that actually they don't need to be afraid of it. We can teach them actually this is something to love. And the way that we usually do that is with having really amazing treats to give them, and whenever they see or hear the thing that they're afraid of. But at the same time, we have to be really careful to make sure that they feel safe, because the most important thing with a fearful dog is that they feel safe. So very often when we're doing counter conditioning, if it's at all possible, we will pair that with something we call desensitization. So that's another technical term, but basically it means that you're always making sure that the dog feels safe. So you're starting with the lowest possible level of access to this thing that they're afraid of. And then you're only going to gradually increase it as the dog is happy, completely happy through the whole process. And sometimes people say to me, how long can you work with a fearful dog? Because they think the training must be hard for the dog. It should not be hard for the dog at all. It should be absolutely wonderful for the dog. You should set it up so that the dog is having an amazing time throughout the whole process. And that really makes counter conditioning work very well.
I like what you said. And I think what you also said before that is that this can be quite complex for people to do. And they might say, hey, this isn't working, or I've tried this and it's not working. Well, maybe the environment's not right. Maybe that the dog requires something that you haven't noticed, or you're not able to give that dog. Putting counter conditioning with desensitization, which obviously is very slow exposure, and always keeping the dog in a comfortable place. What we have seen, certainly at Positively and at VSA, what we are researching, discovering, is that actually counter conditioning and desensitization can be complex for people to do. Complex for trainers to teach, and also for people to utilize. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And when it's done right, it's beautiful. But I think that there is some difficulty in the time that people will give it, the way that people do it. And so we've been exploring that at VSA, and how can we take that and make working with reactive dogs easier for people to utilize. We're not saying that desensitization and counter conditioning doesn't work, but we are saying for those people who are having difficulty, what are other options out there? And I would say that, we've just launched the reactivity course. It's for guardians and for dog trainers and any animal care professionals, anybody who works or wants to be around a dog, that take the reactivity course, because you'll understand what I mean. And I think the problem that we're seeing is that even though people might think that the dog feels safe because the dog is eating the food, that actually there's a lot of conflict behavior, and the dog is actually merely tolerating it. So yeah, it might be eating the food, but it's still conflicted. And it's still in that place where like, oh, I'm gonna have this, but actually I don't think I do feel safe. So you're not going to see much buy-in. Have you seen that in your own work? Have you seen, and in your exploration, discovery, and your research, have you seen that as well as being an issue?
Yes, and I think this is where if people are more practiced at reading a dog's body language, then it's much easier for them to tell, because then they can spot the signs that actually maybe the tail is a bit down, or the dog's posture is a bit low. Maybe they're just reaching in, stretching in to get the treats off you, which we would technically we'd call a stretch investigation. They're not really comfortable to just go forward. And so I think people often do find that they are putting dogs in situations in which they think the dog is safe, but the dog does not think they're safe. And that is a big, big issue. Now, counter conditioning can still work in those situations, but it's much, much better if you help the dog to feel safe. And so one of the ways I like to frame counter conditioning is that the dog should be having a really wonderful surprise, like a really happy time, a really wonderful time, because I think sometimes people can spot when that's not the case, even if they don't spot the signs that the dog isn't entirely comfortable. And I think that also helps to frame it in terms of like a nice surprise. You have to start really thinking about what type of food you're going to be using, because I find a lot of people think, oh, I'll just use kibble or I'll just use dog treats. And that is not going to work for your counter conditioning, or it's not going to work very well, certainly. And there's a reason for that. And that's because counter conditioning works when, technically speaking, I'm just going to throw another technical word in there, there's an expectancy violation. And what that means is, in other words, your dog is having a wonderful surprise. It's the thing that they expect to happen in this circumstance would be to be afraid. And instead they're thinking, oh, wow, this is amazing. I love this. So that's really what people should be aiming for. And I think very often they just think, the dog tolerating something is okay, and that's not okay. That's not what you're looking for. It's this wonderful surprise or party or fabulous experience for the dog, and that means things like cheese or roast beef or something which they don't get at other times, so something really special. And it also means they have to be safe enough to enjoy it. And another sign that they might not be actually safe enough is if when they take the treats from you, it feels a bit kind of hard, like maybe you're feeling the teeth on your hand or something like that. That's one of the other signs that you need to back up and make things a bit easier for the dog. So yes, I do think that's one of the things that people struggle with.
Now, because you've got such a great science background, when you have a reactive dog and you tell your dog off for reacting, and I'm not even saying to use a shock collar or anything like that, but you could. But if you use some kind of punishment, what does that do to the dog?
It's really unfortunate if somebody does that, because that in itself is an unpleasant experience for the dog. So the dog is already scared, and now they're being told off and yelled at. So they're going to feel even worse. So you're not helping the dog to adjust at all. Sometimes maybe the dog will kind of shut down or quieten down, and people think, oh, it's worked because they're no longer reacting, but they're just too scared to do anything. And that actually, if that happens, that can be very dangerous, because then all of a sudden, if they're really uncomfortable, they might actually lunge out and bite or something like that. So it can also be very risky to do that kind of thing. You want your dog to feel comfortable telling you when they feel uncomfortable. So you want your dog to feel able to growl if they're unhappy about something, because that's a really helpful sign to you that they're not happy and that you need to do something to kind of calm everything down and make your dog feel better. So yelling at your dog, it's always bad for your dog. There is a lot of research that shows that it has risks, like any other kind of aversive method, like shock collars, for example, or like prong collars. And those risks include fear, anxiety, stress. They include a worse relationship with you as their owner. And I think that's especially sad, because we get dogs because we want to have a wonderful relationship with them. You don't want to be doing something that's going to damage that relationship. And then also it can make the dog more pessimistic as well. And again, you want your dog to be happy and optimistic. You don't want all of these things. So don't yell at your dog. It will make things worse, basically.
There would be people on here saying, wait a second, what are you talking about making a dog pessimistic? Dogs can't be pessimistic.
I know, but there is actually a method that scientists use to assess whether dogs or other animals are optimistic or pessimistic. And actually, it's really neat the way that they do it. If you'd like me to explain,
yes,
I can.
Please do. Please. Everyone's like, yes, Zazie, explain.
Okay, so basically, it involves training the dog to start with, and you have two bowls. And one of those bowls always contains a nice piece of food, like a piece of chicken, and the other bowl never ever does. And you put them in different locations. So on one side, maybe there's the piece of chicken, and on the other side, there's the empty bowl. And when they're used to that, you know absolutely, because they'll run really fast if you put a bowl down where there's going to be chicken. And if you put a bowl down where they know there's going to be nothing, they're not really interested. They know it's not of interest to them. So then, to assess if they're feeling optimistic or pessimistic, you put a bowl down somewhere in between, like maybe right in the middle or just slightly off to one side. And if the dog is optimistic that it contains chicken, they're going to get there faster than if they think, oh, there's not going to be anything of interest in there to me. So it's an actual scientific method that is used across actually different species and different animal welfare studies to see whether or not an animal is feeling optimistic or pessimistic. So it's called a cognitive bias test. So it's assessing whether they have an optimistic bias or a pessimistic bias. And unfortunately, if dogs are trained using aversive methods, then they tend to have a pessimistic bias compared to dogs who are trained using reward-based methods, who are much more likely to be optimistic.
What does that look like in the test? If you've got a pessimistic dog, you've had a dog that's trained using aversive methods, what does that look like in the test? What do they do?
So what scientists measure is simply the time they take to get to the bowl. So they're not looking even at the dog's body language or anything, although you might notice that anyway. But it's the time they take to get to this ambiguous bowl. So a pessimistic dog is going to take their time to get there. You let the dog go and they're like, meh, it's not very interesting. I'll just amble over and see, but they're not expecting something. Whereas if they're optimistic, they're thinking, oh, there's chicken in there, and they'll go to investigate and find it.
So you're saying so that these dogs do you have as in do you have a control? Do you have dogs that are only go to a bowl that has no food and the other dogs only go to a bowl that has food? How is it set up? I mean, you said with the placement of the bowls, but
Yes, so that's a really great question because of course dogs have amazing noses. So you think maybe they can smell that this bowl contains food and that the other one doesn't. So what they do is they have to rub the food in the empty bowl so that it has the smell of the food, but there isn't actually any food in it. And then some dogs will have a tendency to go more often to the right or more often to the left, and that's just a thing that can be individual to dogs. So across a study, they can change the side, which always has the food. So it's not always going to be the right-hand side. For some dogs, it's going to be the left-hand side. And so that kind of controls for that as well. So it's a really neat setup that they've got for it. And it's been used lots and lots of times. And I think it's a really great way for people to assess the dog's welfare. And it's not just used with dogs. Like there are studies with other kinds of animals as well, even with crows, I think, to see, in what circumstances are they more optimistic or pessimistic. So the kind of limitation of it is that dogs do have to be trained in the first place. So it's not something that you can do without training the dog, but dogs do tend to learn it quite quickly.
All right. So, and the training entails
just letting them find out, basically, repeatedly putting bowls down in the different locations and letting the dogs go to see what it is. And over time they learn, okay, this bowl always has food, and okay, this bowl is always boring and never has anything in it, despite the smell of it.
So then putting that third bowl down there, then you can go, well, if the dog just sort of slouches over there, that definitely has more pessimistic. And then if the dog's like, whoa, this is great, I'm going to investigate this, then you have a dog that's showing more optimism.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And that's important. We want our dogs to be optimistic. I want my dog to go over there. Oh my gosh, there's a bowl put down. What's in it? Yay. I want my dog to be really excited about stuff. I want them to be joyful. I don't want them to be a robot. I don't want them to have to go, oh God, this is awful, and just sort of slouch over there. Then if that's, none of my dogs have been like that. If they were like that, I've done something wrong.
Yeah, if they were like that, you would want to know what was wrong with the dog, and you probably would go to the vet or something. Because I think when you're used to training a dog with rewards, we all see it ourselves when we're working with them. We know that they're enjoying the training, they're enjoying working with us, they're enjoying spending time with us. That's really good for their welfare.
Yeah, isn't it just? It really is. And people say to me now, like I'm a single dog household now, but for most of my dog guardianship, I've had two dogs, and I have obviously put a lot of work into my dogs, but definitely with my single dog, I'm very aware she's a single dog. And so I'm having to put in even more time because there's no other dog for her to hang out with or to play with or to go for a walk with. So definitely I have to make changes because dogs don't do well in social isolation.
No, most dogs love spending time with other dogs. Not all dogs, but most do, and they like to have doggy friends. Even if they're not friends with every dog they meet, they usually will have some particular dogs that they like to spend time with. So it is really important to think about your dog's social life. The nice thing is, though, that they also really love to hang out with us. So time spent with us can, to a large extent, make up for not having other dogs to hang out with too. So I think that's lovely.
When we come back, I'd like to talk about the science of stress. And if you've got any tips on how we can prevent our dogs from getting too stressed out. And if we do have dogs that are showing signs of stress, what can we do about it? So we'll be back after this message. Are you and your dog struggling with reactivity? You're not alone. The good news is that we've created a completely new approach to managing your dog's reactivity, and it's available for you and your dog right now. Go to positively.com, click Take a Course, and choose Help Stop Reactivity to enroll in this game-changing online course for you and your dog today. That's positively.com. I'm back with Zazie Todd, and we're talking all things how to help your anxious, fearful, or reactive dog from a fabulous book, Bark. She's also speaking at the Dog Behavior Conference. She's talking about firsts and nice surprises, a new look at how to help fearful dogs. Okay, so let's talk about stress. How does stress impact behavior? How can you tell if your dog is stressed? And if your dog is stressed, what can you do about it?
Yeah, so very often the thing that we'll be looking at is the dog's body language that will show us that in that moment the dog is not feeling comfortable. So signs of stress, I think the one that most people are well aware of would be the tail being tucked. Sometimes you see the tail tucked so far that even if the dog sits down, they're actually sitting on their tail. You also might see a low body posture. There are little signs that people often miss or misinterpret. So if the dog is licking their lips and you're not about to give them a treat, that's a very common sign of stress. And the dog simply looking away or maybe trying to move away from something can be a sign that they find it stressful as well. And of course, in the worst cases, the dog might simply just kind of throw themselves to the ground and be too terrified to move. And it's awful when you see that happen. So yeah. I think dogs have a lot of subtle signs that unfortunately people often do miss. So it's really worth paying attention to dogs and practicing reading their body language.
What can we do about it if we see that our dogs are stressed out?
Yeah, if you know what is stressing them out, the best thing to do is get them away from it if you can. So if it's because someone is approaching and they want to pet your dog, but your dog is terrified of people, tell that person, actually, they don't want to meet you today. Thank you very much. Move your dog away, actually physically move your dog away. Or if it's another dog approaching and you have a reactive dog, you can ask that person to put their dog on leash. Or sometimes you can use the environment, like you can go behind a wall or a parked car and use that so that your dog doesn't actually see the other dog, for example. Those moments can be difficult because other people don't always cooperate, unfortunately. That's another topic.
Yeah, they get very offended if you say, would you mind, don't touch my dog, or would you mind moving your dog away? They get very offended by it. I mean, come on, let's get over that, shall we?
Yes, they do, but it's nothing about their dog, it's your dog. So I think it would really help if people understood that more. So one thing to think about is if this is something that you cannot prevent your dog from experiencing, then it's really important to see your vet. But also if it's something where you feel like your dog is struggling or you are struggling, again, see your vet. I'm not a veterinarian, but it's important that we as dog trainers work with veterinarians, and vets can prescribe medication that will help. And I think it's good these days that there's less of a stigma around that. People are more used to that kind of idea. So it's always worth seeing your vet. And another thing to consider in some circumstances, and I spoke to a lot of vets when I was writing Bark, and I've got a table of some of the signs that they told me to look for that might mean that your dog is actually experiencing pain, because sometimes pain can kind of be part of the cause of fearful behaviors as well. And to give one example from some of the research of Professor Daniel Mills, it would be if an older dog suddenly becomes afraid of fireworks when they haven't been beforehand, that is maybe a tip-off that you should see your vet, because perhaps that dog is in pain. So we have to see our vets as part of it as well. And then also, if you're struggling, see a dog trainer, get someone to help, because it can feel quite difficult to resolve it. And some things can be easy to resolve, and some things, unfortunately, can take a very long time, and you might be in it for a long haul.
Noise sensitivity. If your dog really hasn't been noise sensitive, and then all of a sudden you see that your dog is becoming noise sensitive, as has happened with my Chihuahua, she's not so bothered by fireworks, and in fact, she's definitely got a lot of hearing loss. But high pitched noises she can still hear. So if you clink you're eating something and your fork clinks on the plate, she's like oof, like this. Now we know she has arthritis, so we're dealing with her arthritis. We knew that because I know this. I was I was on the ball. I was looking and I was thinking, I think she's becoming more noise sensitive. I think this is because she's in pain. And so, giving her the right kind of pain management, now those noises disturb her less. And it's been really interesting to see how her noise sensitivity has grown the older she's gotten. And that has definitely been linked to pain. So, the science is there. You just got to go find it. And if you want to learn more, that's Daniel Mills from the University of Lincoln has done fabulous studies on pain in dogs and how that impacts behavior. So I really love that. I love the fact that you've done such research to do this. Now you have a chapter in the book about understanding the role of medications. Medications seem to be a dark word for people. They don't want to put their dog on medication. I'm sure you've heard that too, Zazie.
I have many times. And actually for that chapter, I went and spoke to Dr. Claudia Richter, who is now a veterinary behaviorist, fully qualified, board certified.
Yeah.
And she said to me about when she has clients who are concerned about medication, people sometimes say to her that they are worried that it will change their dog's personality. And I love the way that she described it, because she described it as the medication actually helping your dog's personality to float up above the anxiety so that you can actually see who your dog really is. So it shouldn't actually be affecting their personality. And she said if it is, you should see her or your vet again, because that's not the aim. It should bring the stress down to a level such that you actually get to see your dog's personality again. And I think that's a really lovely way of putting it and explaining it to people.
So for us non-scientists, and I'm not a veterinarian, a lot of these medications are SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, aren't they? So then there is more available serotonin, which things like fluoxetine are otherwise known as Prozac. People take it, and dogs do too. Dogs can take it as well. Obviously, you got to go to your veterinarian. You can't give the human form of Prozac or the medication dose to your dog. But if you think about a person on Prozac, it normally takes around, what is it, like a month to 6 weeks to start seeing this change. And, sometimes your veterinarian might have to change the dose or heighten it or lower it, depending on how your dog is reacting. But my Jasmine, when Bella died, that was her friend, that was her sidekick, that was her. And definitely I saw an increase in just general nervousness, and she was grieving. And so I felt like her anxiety was a lot more because she'd lost her friend, and she loves us, but we're not dogs. So I went to a vet behaviorist and we put her on a course of fluoxetine for a while. And now she's been weaned off it, but it really helped her. It really helped with her anxiety. You don't know how your dog is going to react. It doesn't have to be that your dog is going to have to be on this medication forever. But it really helped her.
That's great. Yes. And I do think animals grieve, and I've seen that myself with my own pets as well. And with my own cat last year, we lost one of our cats, and our other cat, she was desperately sad. She was wandering around the house as if looking for him and going and sitting in the places where he had always sat. And that lasted for several weeks. And I think it was really hard for her. So I do believe that animals grieve, although I do think sometimes they're not necessarily, like, especially with cats, it's going to depend whether they really get on or not. And sometimes cats in the same home don't. So it depends, of course, on the individual animals. But yes, and again, this is where our veterinarians are so useful and so helpful and so important to help animals to be comfortable and live happy, healthy lives.
How has the book been doing? Because it came out at the end of last year, hasn't it? But I see it everywhere. I see it everywhere. And every single bookstore I go to, because I'm a huge book lover, I always go to the pet section, and guess what? Your book is there. Your
That's
book is
wonderful.
there. And I know people are buying it. I know, because it's always at different places. And I'm like, and there's always just one copy because all the other copies are gone. So your book is always there. How's it been doing?
It's been doing really well. And actually, it's really nice. People keep sending me copies, like photographs of it in the bookstore. They go in their local bookstore and they see it and they take a photo and they send it to me. And I love that. I really like that. And a lot of libraries have it too. So actually, just this morning, I had an email from Dr. Mia Cobb, who's in Melbourne, and her local library has Bark actually on display.
Yes.
She sent me, it's on display right at the front of the library. So I was thrilled to get that. And I really like that people keep sending me these pictures. It's just lovely because it's what you want. You want people to be able to get hold of your book. So it really is in all good bookstores apparently, which is very nice.
Oh no, it is. And I mean, obviously around the world, because this is, and I see it in the UK. I mean, I've seen so many different books from American writers or Canadian writers. And then I'm over in the UK and I'm in Waterstones or whatever, smaller bookstores. And I go, oh my gosh, there's the book. And it's so exciting because I know so many of the people who have written these books. So it's just like, oh my gosh, this is lovely. And of course, it's meaning that everybody who has access to these books and has access to knowledge. Now, you write for Psychology Today. You've been doing that for years and years, haven't you? I mean, I remember reading an article. I don't know, has it been more than 10 years?
Yes, it has. It has. And more than 13 years since I started my blog, Companion Animal Psychology, as well. And I started writing for Psychology Today quite soon after I started that as well. So, yes, a long time now, which is really great.
How did you get into this industry?
It was really because of two dogs I had, Ghost and Bodger, who I wrote about in WAG, and they had a few issues between them, especially Bodger. And also, my background is in human psychology, and my mum sent me a copy of a book by John Bradshaw. In the UK, it's called In Defense of Dogs.
Yes,
in North
fabulous.
America, it's called Dog Sense. It's a wonderful book.
Yep.
And I loved it so much, and I loved reading about all the science that's in there. And I thought, wow, when I was a psychology student and when I was a psychology academic, psychologists were not interested in dogs and cats at all. And I actually, at one point, would have really loved to do something on cats when I was quite young, when I was a student, but it wasn't possible because they were interested in chimps. And great apes. They were interested in rats and mice and putting them through mazes, and everything in between was like, no, that's not interesting. And I was like, wow, I never knew that this existed. And so that's why I started looking into it and reading some of the science on it. And of course, when you're looking at things like counter conditioning and how dogs learn, that is part of every psychologist's basic training anyway. So everyone who does a degree, even an undergraduate degree in psychology, learns about that. So that part I already knew anyway, but the more recent stuff, I was like, wow, I did not know that people were studying dogs and cats in this way. And I just thought it was fantastic. So I started writing my blog, and I never imagined that it would be anything other than a bit of a hobby. But I've been very lucky. And of course, it's turned into several books and taking clients and things like that. So it's just been quite amazing. And I feel very lucky to be able to do all of this.
Because, of course, you've got WAG, which is the science of making your dog happy.
Yes. And that was the first book that I wrote. And that is behind me.
Yeah, I've got it on my bookshelf. I've got it on my bookshelf, right? Oh, maybe you can see it. Yeah, you can see it right next. There's Karen Pryor's. There it is. See?
Oh, right. That's fantastic. WAG. Yes, I can see. Yes. That's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. And every now and again, I turn books face ways so that if there's somebody on the podcast, or, you know, if I'm doing a thing, then I can put people's books out there like you do, which I think is great.
Yeah, I love to do it because I used to work a very long time ago. I used to work in a bookstore. I've always loved books. When my publisher said to me that I had to have my own books turned out behind me, I thought it feels a bit too self-promotional. So I wanted to turn other people's books out as well. And actually, it's really nice because people comment and they say, "Oh, I wish I had those books," or "What did you think of this book?" So I'm in meetings with people and they'll comment on them. And I think that's really nice.
Yeah, it is. I love to promote other people's books. I love it. And I'm always doing it. Now at the dog behavior conference, you talk about positive first times. What do you mean by
Yes.
positive first times?
The thing is that whenever a dog is learning about something, it's the very first time is the most important. That's when the most amount of learning is going to happen. And if you were to draw like a graph of how much learning happens, the first time it's going to be like a massive amount. The second time it's a bit less, and the time after that it's a bit less, and then basically it's a lot less after that. And what that means is that the very first time we're doing counter conditioning or the dog is meeting something new for the first time, we really have to take advantage of that. Otherwise, we've missed a wonderful opportunity. So when you think about fearful dogs, unfortunately, very often they've had many experiences already with the thing that they're afraid of. So they've had lots and lots of learning already that says that this is a terrifying time. This is a horrible thing to happen and I hate it, basically. And unfortunately, those fear memories, they never actually go away. They're still there. So what we're going to try and do is to try and pile up lots of really positive experiences on top of that. So I think of it like a metaphor, like actually piling things up, making a big stack of positive, happy memories. And the very first time we do that is our best opportunity to make a difference. And so if someone is only using kibble that time, they're not creating a nice surprise, they're actually not going to create a lot of learning. You've missed a really fantastic opportunity there to start making a difference. So that's why those first times are so important. And the other thing is, like, even if you've just adopted a dog, like a rescue dog, they will have had lots of experiences. Maybe they're quite fearful, but they haven't had those experiences with you. And so they still count as first times. So maybe they've been to the vet before, but it's going to be their first time at your vet and their first time at the vet with you. So again, this is a nice way to frame it as somewhere where you can make a big difference to that dog.
Zazie, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for writing these books and know what it's like to write a book. It's a lot of time and dedication and angst and heartache, but my gosh, when it's done, boy, is it worth it. And it's so weird, isn't it, to see your book on a bookshelf in a bookstore. Isn't that the best feeling?
It is such a special thing. Yeah, it's just amazing because you work so hard on a book and as you say, it's such a difficult thing to do. If you've never written one, I don't think people realize how much editing goes on.
Yes.
And there are times when it feels like it's going on forever and you're like, when am I going to be done with all of this? And then it's just really incredible to actually see your book in the bookstores and to hear people talking about your book and enjoying it and finding it helpful. It's such a special thing to do. And we were talking about books. I hope you've seen that. I've got one of your books up there too.
I know. We got my puppy book up there.
Yes.
I love my puppy, raising a puppy. So it is just, that was the last book that I wrote. And I think after that, I'm not writing anymore. I'm going to leave it to you, Zazie, to write all the books from now on. I don't want to write another book. So we're done with that because, yes, it takes a whole load of patience, a whole load of dedication. But thank you so much. Guys, if you want to hear Zazie Todd talk about firsts and nice surprises, a new look at how to help fearful dogs, she will be one of the speakers at the Dog Behavior Conference. Thank you for joining me today, Zazie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you, and I can't wait for the conference.
The conference, the Dog Behavior Conference, if you go to dogbehaviorconference.com, register now, and hopefully we'll see you there. I'm on the conference all 3 days, but you don't have to be there all 3 days because it's a lot of information per day. But once you register and the presentations go out live, you have access to all the presentations, all the Q&As, for a year afterwards. So, hey, come register, dogbehaviorconference.com, 12 amazing speakers. And we're just going to have a great 3 days. We have raffles, we raise money, we have loads of prizes. And something special is going to happen this year as well, as we recognize some very, very special people. So thanks, guys, for joining me on the podcast. And I look forward to seeing you on another podcast very soon. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Victoria Stilwell's Positively podcast. For Victoria's online dog training courses, more information, and helpful dog training tips, visit Victoria's official website at positively.com. Get connected on Facebook, Instagram, and other social media as Victoria Stilwell, and follow her on Twitter at Victoria S. Learn to become a professional dog trainer with the Victoria Stilwell Academy at vsdogtrainingacademy.com. And be sure to tune in next time as Victoria helps you and your dog live your best life together, positively.